Hello, everybody, and welcome back to coverage of Grand Prix Denver. This is round 9. It's our last round of the Swiss. I'm Gabby Sparks, joined by Luis Scott Vargas, and here we see Brandon de Jong versus Steve Rubin. We're going to see a matchup of White Blue Flash versus Teamer Aetherworks, and we've seen this a couple of times. I enjoyed Reed mentioned that White Blue Flash was kind of like the natural predator of Teamer Aetherworks. Can you tell us a little bit about the matchup?
Well, the reason that the Blue-White Flash deck has a good game against it really lies in the fact that Spell Queller does a good job of stopping the card Aetherworks Marvel, and the Aetherworks deck does not do very well when the Marvel isn't in play. On the other hand, we just saw Steve Rubin defeat this matchup in the hands of Paul Cheon, and it looks like Steve's deck is set up such that he can fight against Spell Queller. He has Harness Lightning. He has cards like Whirler Virtuoso, which kind of clog the board and give him a bunch of little flyers. So Steve has maybe traded in a little bit of explosiveness compared to the straight combo version we saw at the Pro Tour in exchange for actually having a good mid-range game.
So do you think this is mostly a very good metagame call, or is there any advantage to just trying to deviate from the go all-in plan and just try to Virtuoso instead?
This is the kind of deck you'd build if you expected to play against more blue-white than black-green, because cards like Harness Lightning, not really what you want against black-green. They can kill Grimflare, yes, but sometimes you'll just get draws where it doesn't do much. On the other hand, one of the things people are coming around to is the fact that Harness Lightning and Servant of the Conduit just fuel your Aetherworks Marvel, so the opportunity cost of playing them is lower than you might think.
How much does it punish your mana base, or does it not?
Splashing blue makes it a little bit more difficult, but thanks to Ether Hub and Attune with Ether, it's not that big, though Steve is playing cards like Botanical Sanctum, which do have a cost later in the game.
So Brandon going with a bit of an aggressive start. I mean, as aggressive as you want to call some Reflector Mages that are just trying to get in there, but pair of Reflector Mages, and was able to bounce out Whirler Virtuoso, though thankfully for Steve, it was able to provide some energy before it was back in his hand, and the follow-up there of Servant of the Conduit. 2, actually. So he's up to 10 energy now. Yeah,
Brandon, he took an aggressive line by bouncing these multiple different energy makers, Conduit on turn 2 and World of Virtuoso on turn 3, which means that Steve just has massive amounts of energy, and that means if he resolves Aetherworks Marvel, he's going to get multiple shots at it.
All right, so both Reflector Mages coming in and attacking. Looks like 2 of them might be jumping in front of the first one. Oh, and this is a bit of a blowout. Both of them are going to die because Brandon's going to stasis near one of them.
Well, I mean, this might not be a game of limited, but combat tricks and removal into a double block certainly does the trick.
So not only does Steve is not able to take down that Reflector Mage, he actually lost 2 mana, or 2 mana producers, if you may, in that exchange.
And this is where Steve, if he had a Aetherworks Marvel, would just slam it, but it does not look like he has one.
Instead, he's going to Tormenting Voice, discarding a forest. Let's see what he found. A land. And the Virtuoso. Coming in, providing 3 more energy.
So Steve's up to something like 12 energy, is that right?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
So that makes 4 Thopters, even if Steve doesn't have an Aetherworks Marvel. So Whirler Virtuoso really showing how good it is, especially since it even blocks one of the Reflector Mages. Like, Brandon just did not have a great attack here.
Was he not at 10? He should be at 13. Yeah, so they're getting a new... Yeah, they just switched it. So let's see how Brandon wants to follow up. And how does Brandon want to play this matchup in general?
Brandon really wants to do what he did, which is get ahead on board and then punish Steve with Spell Queller, but either Brandon was lacking Spell Queller or did not have the opportunity to leave mana up for one. So he hasn't really been able to get himself in the position he needs, because at this point, Steve has almost stabilized the board.
So Brandon playing Thalia, Heretic, Cathar, and this is going to force some action from Steve because he wants these Thopters to come into play untapped. Looks like he's making 1.
1 Thopter means that Brandon can attack and Steve can double block and trade a Thopter for a Reflector Mage. It's actually kind of bad news for Brandon that Steve isn't making more Thopters, because that means that Steve has other uses for that energy.
Other plans for the energy?
Yeah, and that is not something that Brandon wants to see.
So let's see what Steve's plan for this energy ends up being. He's taking a look, and there you can see creatures and non-basic lands are going to enter the battlefield tapped.
And that does mitigate something like Marvel because you put in an Emrakul, it's tapped. Brandon extra turn doesn't involve getting Emrakul, but still, I think that Whirler Virtuoso plus whatever Steve plays this turn is going to do a pretty good job of getting Steve to the point where he can call the board stable.
Let's see what he's found. So it looks like it's 4 mana and it's Chandra.
Chandra has continued to impress. She's exactly what
She's
this deck
done
wants.
great this weekend. Oh wow, he ticked up and has a Marvel. He drew a Marvel.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Big game.
Because now Steve got to play 2 great plays this turn, and if he hits something big here, then the game could be almost over.
All right, that is something big, and it qualifies. That's Ulamog, the Ceaseless Hunger.
And that's great because Ulamog can trigger Eat Thalia and then come into play untapped if Steve even cares about that. Or he could just go after like Brandon's mana. He could just take out both his blue sources.
What do you think looks more appealing now? Well, it looks like Steve thinks it's a lands.
Well, one of the reasons to actually take out the white sources is it prevents Stasis Snare from being cast.
All right.
So if Steve eats the plains in the Prairie Stream, all of a sudden Brandon's not able to cast pretty much anything relevant next turn.
It's true, and also Ulamog is such a fast clock. It doesn't really matter that he comes into play tap this turn, All right, so if you're Brandon, what are you trying to do now? You're facing Ulamog. This is a very fast clock.
I'm thinking about how I'm going to sideboard after,
All right.
after this game ends.
Fair enough.
Not all hope is lost, but given that Brandon's missed a land drop, probably not playing anything relevant this turn,
Yep.
and facing down Ulamog, Chandra, Whirler Virtuoso, and Etherworks Marvel, I really don't see a way out. Steve could miss on Marvel, and it wouldn't even matter that much.
It looks like Brandon's actually attacking Chandra here, and some amount are attacking Chandra. All right, so Virtuoso in front of the Reflector Mage. They pillow fight. The Thopter stops the Thalia, and Chandra takes 2.
And so now Steve has Chandra. He can use her. He's got Ulamog that's almost assuredly taking a bite out of Brandon here. And if he wants to minus Chandra, he's very close to getting another Etherworks Marvel trigger. And in fact, I think he picked up a Vessel of Nascency. That's going to give him the 6 energy if he wants to send Chandra to the graveyard too.
All right, so 1 green. And there's that Vessel. Coming down for Steve, and a crack it immediately, and let's see what's inside that Vessel. Ishkana land, another land, and Tune with Ether.
And a Tune is another way for Steve to get up to the 6 energy required. He also could take Ishkana and plus Chandra and play Ishkana with sorcery, enchantment, land. It would actually not quite be Delirium there.
Yeah, so Chandra taking down the Thalia. That also gets another card type into the graveyard. And provides him another energy too.
And now Brandon has to think whether he wants to show Steve these cards from Ulamog, the 20 cards that Ulamog is exiling.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it matters too much because Brandon's playing a blue-white flash deck. Steve has seen this deck before.
I was going to say, how many surprises is white-blue flash really bringing to the table? Like, if you're the deck that we saw earlier in the day that's playing, Town Gothmonger, sure. People came prepared for white-blue flash.
Yeah, and so Brandon's not really giving up much information here, though I think Brandon's kind of... His board position is hopeless enough that he's less than 1% to win this game.
I mean, you're 8-0 at the Grand Prix, right? You got to play it out.
No, currently I'm doing coverage. I'm not at the Grand Prix. Also, I actually don't play out situations like this, and maybe that's a leak in my game. But if I'm Brandon, I probably would have scooped 2 turns ago. Which I'm not saying Brandon should.
Fair enough.
I'm being very clear that that's what I would do because I would have judged the situation hopeless enough. But I have absolutely no problem with Brandon playing it out to the extent he feels it's necessary.
Sure, definitely. All right, and then there it goes. And Brandon picks up his cards, and Steve Rubin up a game here. He's currently 8-0, off to the best start possible here at the Grand Prix. See, that's the thing. At the Pro Tour, people will play it out. But I think when you're 8-0 at a Grand Prix, it's completely fine to do that also.
It really just depends on the player. Time is not an issue here, so I think there's absolutely no reason not to. And in general, I think what Brandon did made a lot of sense.
All right, so it looks like we have a spicy one over here. This is David Darley versus Tyler Hume. This is white-red mid-range versus black-green Delirium, and we haven't seen anything like white-red mid-range yet.
looks like kind of angel-based with the package of Thalia's Lancers that can go get Gisela the Broken Blade, Archangel Avacyn, Linval the Preserver, and Bruna the Fading Light. So it's kind of like a white-red vehicles deck with 4 Nahiris and a bunch of angels. So it has a higher curve, but still has Smuggler's Copter and Thraben Inspector and Veteran Motorist. So the idea is that you're a little bit slower, but the exchange is that you have much more power available to you.
All right, so Kalitas is dead from that exchange, and what an interesting matchup. We haven't really seen anything like this wide-red mid-range deck, but the toolbox aspect of it is pretty interesting.
4 copies of Fairgrounds Warden, which is pretty aggressive. On the other hand, Tyler's playing Black Green Delirium, and that deck is great, and it looks like he's in very good shape right now.
I mean, this is Black Green Delirium doing what it always wants to do, you know? Take up my Planeswalker, get another clue of my tracker, play my Ishkana, hide behind all these spiders, eventually find that Emrakul.
Yeah, and it looks like Tyler's well on his way here. He might accidentally win the game too early with Ishkana and Tireless Tracker, but if he doesn't, Emrakul and also actually Liliana Emblem is kind of threatening to take over.
Yeah, so it looks like Spore Thriving Inspectors do not get to continue inspecting anymore. Jumping in front of a bunch of creatures to prevent some damage. And follow-up Ishkana replacing the old one, bringing even more spiders. Do you think maybe this one is finally the time that we see an Ishkana activation?
There's a chance with 7 spiders in play. Tyler is starting 7 life off Ishkana, and I could see him in a position where he can just attack with everything and activate Ishkana. Especially since Ishkana is now untapped thanks to the new version, so Nahiri is unable to exile her.
All right, so Nahiri takes down the Tireless Tracker, but also goes down in the process.
And David has more removal spells. He's got Stasis in there. He's got Harness Lightning. He's just not really making any headway. And Gisela is not actually, despite being great at fighting, can't actually take down all those spiders. Like, the spiders just swarm her, and it ends up not working out well for Gisela.
Very flavorful if you think about it, as spiders should. So it looks like a Stasis Snare to take down that Ishkana.
And David doing that before passing the turn in order to prevent Tyler from activating the Ishkana, like you mentioned. So I guess no. The answer is no, we will not see Ishkana being activated.
Not happening. I got my hopes up, but for no reason. All right, so Tyler kicking things off by cracking that clue. Let's see what he finds. It was a grapple with a pest.
Yeah, Tyler's got a lot of options here.
Yeah, he has a grip full of cards.
And he can plus the Liliana threaten to ultimate next turn. He can minus the Liliana and get back something like Mindrak Demon, it looks like, his second Ishkana. So he's got a wealth of options, and it's actually one of those spots where you know, some games you have like multiple paths and some lead to victory and some lead to defeat. I think Tyler just has a lot of different paths that lead to victory.
Yep.
So, I mean, clearly there is probably a line that leads to him not winning, but I suspect there are not very many lines that lead to him losing and a lot that lead to him winning here.
All right, so a Grim Flayer also making an appearance for Tyler.
8 p.m. Quickfire Legacy players. It's 8 p.m.
But Gisela has been shrunken thanks to the Liliana. Wow, and Harness Lightning taking down one spider, that doesn't feel good.
Yeah, you traded a card for less than a quarter of an Ishkana.
Gathering point. Your judge has your pairings.
Land, and there's a Smuggler's Copter in hand. That is going to be making an appearance.
And I don't think David can get that Liliana off the board or reduce her loyalty, so I think Tyler has this game pretty much in the bag.
Grapple with a pass, and let's see what Tyler finds.
No Emrakul needed even. I don't think Emrakul is going to be required to close this out.
Here's an interesting question, because I feel like that's kind of what Black Green Delirium is trying to do. It's like, I'll do all these things, and then they'll Emrakul and win the game, right? How do these decks play out if Emrakul were just not in the format?
I don't even know if Black Green Delirium would exist. It's certainly not in its current form because it gets so much mileage out of the 4 Traverse 1 Emrakul that is, how it closes out probably like half the games, maybe a little less than half. So if Emrakul just doesn't exist, if she was sealed in the moon forever or imprisoned in the moon forever, then I suspect a deck like this would still make sense, because look, this deck's very synergistic. It's working out really well here for Tyler, even though he doesn't have an Emrakul. But it would be so much weaker in the mirror, or rather not in the mirror, against other mid-range just in general.
Yeah.
And against, I think, control decks. So Emrakul having this like unrelenting threat that is so hard to deal with is really important for the deck. And yeah, I think it'd be a very different Unicurse without
That's really interesting.
Emrakul.
I don't know, maybe you end up seeing more like green-black beatdown. Like we've seen very aggressive versions of this deck that are playing Grim Flare and like ways to protect them.
Yeah, you would definitely see the Smuggler's Copter, Grim Flare, like Catacomb Sifter deck seeing more play. We saw some of that earlier. And that would be a viable deck as well. What, did Liliana tick up to 8?
All right, so it looks like this match will still be a little bit of a while. So let's move back to our main match for now.
This match will be a while, but it's actually over. I mean, Tyler
yes.
is going to win.
That is definitely true, but this is kind of what the green-black Delirium deck does, right? It kind of like squeezes it out of you like a noose constrictor or something. In the meantime, moving back here, this is Brandon DeJong and Steve Rubin. So Steve is up a game. And as we mentioned before, interestingly enough, White Blue Flash is very well set up to battle against Team Aetherworks, but looks like Steve's deck came prepared. Oh, wow. Okay, so this coming in from the sideboard. Natural Stake taking down that Smuggler's Copter. Taking a look at the sideboards, Luis, who do you think this is going to favor?
So Steve gets Natural State and Tears of Valakut, which are quite effective against the blue-white deck. We also might see him bring in cards like Tireless Tracker frequently come in if you want to just to have some creature-based threats. On the other hand, Brandon gets more counterspells. Counterspells are still good against Aetherworks Marvel. And Fragmentize means even though they get the first spin when they play the Marvel, you get to blow up the Marvel and end up in a spot where you're able to prevent them from going back to the well multiple times.
I will say that I've played the Teamer Aetherworks deck, or not Teamer, actually, just green-red Aetherworks deck quite a bit. And playing against counterspells is just the most miserable experience.
Yeah, the team Channel Fireball all pretty much played Teamer Aetherworks at the last Pro Tour. Matt Nass actually ended up making top 8, but overall they were not very happy with the deck choice because the blue-white flash deck was just so difficult to beat.
Yeah. Tireless Tracker making an appearance for Steve. It's turn 3, so he doesn't quite get to get a clue yet.
And he's probably relying on the fact that Brandon may have trimmed the number of Reflector Mages in his deck. And even if Brandon has Stasis Snare is so good against Emrakul that getting rid of the Tireless, or using Tireless Tracker to trade for it is fine. And Natural State killing Stasis Snare is such a big swing.
All right, so Gideon coming down for Brandon. Reading a Knight.
That's pretty good. If Brandon didn't have the Thraben Inspector, would be a lot more risky because one removal spell later and the Tireless Tracker could potentially attack the Gideon. But even if Steve can kill one of the creatures, Gideon still gets a chump blocker.
All right, so let's see what Steve can do in the face of this Gideon.
Looks like he has multiple copies of Tears of Valakut in his hand, which very effective against cards like Spellqueller and Avacyn, a little less effective against ground creatures here.
So he's going to go for 1 green, and there's a Vessel of Nascency pulled all the way to the right. So it doesn't seem like he's ready to fire it off yet.
Yeah, things are a little awkward because Steve would love to play Evolving Wilds this turn, but he doesn't have double green to use a Vessel. So he might play Evolving Wilds and then just use Tireless Tracker, or he can play a green source.
Yeah, so he is going to end up playing that green source. This green source also brings a clue thanks to this Tireless Tracker. Yeah, that was a little bit of clunky. That's exactly the times that you see the drawbacks of playing something like Team Aetherworks versus, Green-Red Marvel.
Yeah, that island was not doing Steve any favors there.
Let's see what Brandon follows up with this turn. Ooh, we're getting aggressive. Gideon ticks up and becomes a creature.
Well, Brandon, I think, identifying that if he doesn't start clocking Steve here, then he's gonna have trouble against Steve's late game. So Gideon does the most damage possible by just +1ing. The disadvantage, though, is that if Steve has a removal spell, then he can attack with Tireless Tracker, or he can just attack with Tireless Tracker with 2 clues in play and force Brandon to start chump blocking.
Well, this does drop Steve down to 15. And it looks like Steve is going to go ahead and crack this clue.
Interesting. Given that he ended up, if he's going to end up cracking the clue, then I think he would have preferred to play Evolving Wilds instead
Right,
of
because then
the
he doesn't need
Cinerglade.
green.
But it maybe left his options open, so that's one of the reasons to wait.
Well, he still hasn't quite done it yet, so let's see what he ends up choosing. Yeah, he is actually going for the clue. Counter on the tracker. Let's see what he draws. He drew an Oracle.
Yeah, not the card you really want to see staring down at you this early. Great draw later in the game, though. So Steve currently on instant land, about to be enchantment. Pretty easily to end up having a 9-mana Emrakul, and not that much harder to have an 8-mana Emrakul. So Steve has a game plan if he can survive a little longer. That Gideon's pressuring him pretty well, though.
That's funny. So Steve drew another Tireless Tracker, so actually not having played that Evolving Wilds, now is just going to be multiple triggers on these Tireless Trackers.
Yeah, he's going to get extra Tireless Tracker value, but because Tears of Valakut is just so enticing to play this turn, I think he might lead with the Forest. And it looks like he's actually not even playing the Tireless Tracker.
Yeah. Just a Forest and a clue for the first Tireless Tracker. Tireless Tracker number 2.
Oh, so he must be playing on Revolutionary Rebuff. And so he played his Forest first in order to not get rebuffed, which makes a lot of sense. And if Brennan does have Avacyn here, then Steve, I think, is going to be pretty happy if he just passes the turn and then can Tears of Valakut the Avacyn once she comes down.
Yeah, so Brandon doing exactly what you said. Here comes Archangel Avacyn. Yep, and Tears of Valakut is going to say no thank you.
Didn't even have time to get the Archangel Avacyn.
Yeah, and it was like, snap it off.
Before the flip card gets replaced. That turn worked out pretty well for Steve. He spent 5 mana on 2 cards, Brand spent 5 mana on 1 card, and Steve traded his 2 mana card for Brandon's 5 mana card. So even though Gideon's still a threat, those double Tireless Trackers can now really start pressuring the Gideon if Steve's not worried about another Avacyn.
I enjoyed Steve respecting the Revolutionary Rebuff. I mean, the card doesn't get any respect, and it doesn't get a lot of respect for multiple reasons, but...
It doesn't deserve lots of respect, but Steve did, by giving up the potential for 1 clue, he made it so the Revolutionary Rebuff couldn't counter Tireless Tracker and couldn't even counter Tears of Valakut because it can't be countered. So that was good, but he potentially blanked a card in Brandon's hand.
All right, so Gideon continuing to take up an attack. Steve's still at 15, so pretty comfortable, potentially taking a couple hits from this Gideon.
Gideon's also kind of getting into Emblem Rage, but those 2 Tireless Trackers really, I think there's a good chance they start attacking soon.
Yep, so Steve taking another 5, dropping him down to 10. Well, let's see what he can string together this turn.
And once again, Steve does have the ultimate plan of eventually Emrakuling. And, here's the value you talked about earlier.
Yep. And there's that Evolving Wilds.
Steve's now officially clue flooded. He's going to once he cracks Evolving Wilds, he'll have 5 clues. So he's in no danger of running out of clues to crack with Tireless Tracker.
It looks like his sideboard plan is actually working out really nicely.
Yeah, this has been effective. The Tireless Trackers have been good, and the Tears of Valakut have been good, and that's all you can really ask for out of your sideboard cards.
All right, so Stasis Snare.
This is going to work out so well for Steve. Yes, he's going to lose the +1 counter because the bigger Tireless Tracker might be snared, but he can really set up a nice ambush with Natural State. On the other hand, he could, if he wants, Natural State in response to the trigger so it never gets exiled, in which case he keeps the counter. But the potential for an ambush is something enticing. You'd have to go through and kind of look at how Brandon's going to attack. Maybe that is relevant or not. But it does seem like there's value there. And if Steve didn't have Tears of Valakut in hand, I would be a lot less inclined to try that because Spell Queller just ruins your day. But with Tears of Valakut in hand, it's pretty safe. I mean, Brandon would have to have a negate, and he already has negate mana up, so you're not actually even playing around it.
All right, so Steve is letting that Tireless Tracker go underneath a Stasis Snare. He does manage to crack that Evolving Wilds and get that extra value before it is gone. So land coming down for Brandon and the Thraben Inspector.
Brandon wants to get in on this clue action. But Steve
not even close, though. 5 clues versus 1 clue? These
Yes.
Inspectors are kind of slacking, right?
Yeah, Steve has a much better picture of what's going on.
This Gideon continues to tick up.
Well, Steve can only ignore Gideon for so long.
Steve deciding what he wants to do in the face of this Gideon attacking. All right, so Tireless Tracker is actually tired now, down in the graveyard, but it's going to save Steve 5 points of life. Natural State taking down that Stasis Snare.
And the way things worked out, Steve didn't really get any sweet ambushes going, but he still was able to trade 1 mana for 3. And in a game where you have infinite clues and a Vessel of Nascency to be attending to, trading 1 mana for 3 is a very good deal.
So Brandon in the tank about this. If you're Steve, do you get a read of specifically what is he thinking about countering it? Like, what are you thinking?
Brandon's really representing a counterspell, whether it's Spell Queller or Negate. And I'd be surprised if Brandon didn't actually have one. I mean, so he might be trying to bluff here, but I don't think that's the case.
Yeah, there's that Spell Queller. And Tears of Valakut gonna ruin this party. Oh no, maybe not. Or not yet.
I think Steve's likely to cast Tears, but might as well get more information off Vessel first. And Steve at Delirium with Enchantment, Creature, Land, Instant currently. So that Ishkana will in fact provide Steve with a legion of blockers.
Yep, and that is exactly what he takes.
So land, sorcery, instant, creature, enchantment. So Emrakul costs 8 mana. Steve's only 2 turns away from Emrakul if he hits his next 2 land drops.
Yeah, he's not casting Tears. He's just cracking a clue.
And I think he really wants to hit his 7th land, so he can go Ishkana, have Tears up, and then mid-combat, kill your Spell Queller, get back Natural State, kill your Stasis Snare, and all of a sudden have a ton of blockers out of nowhere.
We might see this ambush. We may just see it.
This is one of the few cases where a Tune with Ether, not quite as good as just drawing a land, because Steve would love an untapped 7th land, but it looks like he's not going to get it.
All right, so Ishkana making an appearance, and
Oh, wow.
oh wow, get rebuffed.
Revolutionary Rebuff all-star right here. Actually, that's going to send us to a game 3. Just out of nowhere, all of a sudden, Steve's board position disintegrates.
Wow, that was his last card.
And not finding the 7th land off that clue was actually huge.
Jeez, that was unexpected.
Yeah.
Wow, we make so much fun of Revolutionary Rebuff, but there you go. It went
Straight up won the game.
It straight up won the game. Where exactly as you mentioned, also it seemed like Steve just kind of had all of these things planned out, and a lot of ways to kind of navigate his way to victory, and then wow.
I know if I'm Steve, at the end of that game, I'm thinking like, wow, I might have been able to win that game. There are definitely lines he could have taken. Not saying that the lines he took were bad, but that it was one of those games with lots of options, and when you all of a sudden end up losing it out of kind of what feels like out of nowhere to the last card in their hand being Revolutionary Rebuff, you have to be somewhat disappointed.
It's interesting, too, because Steve has been playing around Rebuff. He's shown that he's willing to play around Rebuff in different games when it looks like he might have it. So, I don't know. He'll have to take a look back at that game. And that is a cool thing that the players do get to do when they're featured here. They do get to go back and take a look and see what did their opponent have during these different turns and learn some more.
I just rewatched the games that I win.
Not the ones that you lose.
No, I don't like watching myself lose.
You did a thing with Marshall where you guys rewatched your finals loss to the
That's true. Pro Tour Kyoto. It was one of the most heartbreaking losses, but it was also an awesome match.
Well, it's interesting because you said you don't rewatch them and you hadn't rewatched them forever, but you legitimately knew every single thing that was going on in that. Like, you knew it turn by turn.
Well, that's because I played that match.
Well, yes, but it was, what was it? How many years ago was it?
7 years ago.
See, there you go.
It was one of my most memorable matches. Gabriel Nassif is, of course, a Hall of Famer and one of the best players to ever play the game.
All right, so moving over to David Darley versus Tyler Huell. This is, once again, wide red mid-range versus black-green Delirium, and currently Tyler is up a game. Now, the wide red mid-range deck, it seems like it's a toolbox deck. Oh wait, something interesting is going on here. A natural state to kill the own artifact to enable Delirium for this Ishkana to come by.
Well,
all right, that's not something we've seen before, but that is actually very cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. Delirium off 3 cards is cool too. Instant sorcery, artifact, and creature. Very convenient.
The Pilgrim's Eye is doing double duty.
And then now Ishkana plus Kalitas plus a zombie token plus 3 spiders. It makes it pretty difficult for David to really imagine getting in there.
All right, so deck and stone. Stoning away those spore spiders.
Well, that actually helps quite a bit. The combination of deck and stone and stasis snare means that David will at least be able to prevent Liliana from ultimating next turn if he stasis snares the Ishkana. But that still leaves Tyler with a Kalitas that can start attacking back.
Natural state on your own Pilgrim's Eye. That was very cool. All right, so Stasis Snare puts that Ishkana away, and this does stop Lily from ticking up. And our first match is going. I definitely want to see the end of that match, so let's actually move on back. So it's once again Brandon versus Steve. Both players are 1-1. This is White Blue Flash versus Teamer Aetherworks. And Steve off to a quick start here, a Servant of the Conduit to kick things off, and a Tune with Ether on turn 1 as well. Yeah,
Steve demonstrating why Servant of the Conduit is in the deck and why it's so good. He's going to be able to play a turn 3 Aetherworks Marvel on the play. He's actually, if he had the true best draw and had, oh no, I guess even all 3 Ether Hubs wouldn't quite do it. He's not going to be able to 6 energy this turn, but he has a turn 3 Marvel, and it's just so hard to win a long game. So if Brandon doesn't have one of his 2 Fragmentizes almost immediately, Steve is going to get to Marvel, and we could see a really fast game. Uh-oh.
Oh, no. Okay, it's just a Raven Inspector. That's the moment as a Marvel player, you're like, oh my gosh, my heart is going to stop. Oh, wait, it's okay. It's just a Raven Inspector. Well, see, this is a really cool thing, right? Because you need to resolve Marvel, and that's a very difficult thing to do through a lot of these counter spells. But if you have a really quick start like this, like now the Marvel's in play.
And this is why you need Fragmentize. If you're Brandon, in order to disrupt a resolved Marvel, you can't always count on countering it. But he's only got the 2 Fragmentizes. He can't really play many more than that, and that means Steve is going to have free reign to start marbling here.
Let's see what Brandon wants to follow up with. A Selfless Spirit. He was able to loot away one of those smugglers' copters. Brandon also looks content to tap out, knowing now also that Steve has already resolved this Marvel. Whirler Virtuoso makes an appearance, and this is enough energy for Steve to activate that Marvel. And let's take a look. Nothing yet.
Well, does not look like an Eldrazi.
Looks like a whiff. I mean, there's cards you can play, but it's not a big Eldrazi.
No. Tireless Tracker, kind of your consolation prize here. Potentially like a red removal spell.
So it looks like he is going to choose that Tireless Tracker.
And I don't think Steve has played a land yet, so he, by waiting on his land, he actually got additional Tireless Tracker value. That was a good play from Steve.
Yeah, that was a heads-up play. Good sequencing. Yep.
Tireless Tracker is an energy engine. It generates clues, which get sacked, which generate energy from Aetherworks Marvel. So that's a pretty funny way to go about things.
And he's going to be using the last energy he has for another Servant. Does this bring another 2 energy?
This is the great thing about Steve's build is that he came pretty close to whiffing on Marvel, wasn't great, but he still has 4 creatures in play. He's got Tireless Tracker, Whirler Virtuoso to create energy and have an energy sink if he doesn't even want to get up to Marvel. Like, Steve's not behind on board. He's actually ahead on board, and he still has the potential to just Emrakul out of nowhere thanks to the Marvel.
If you're Brandon, what are you trying to do in this game now that the Marvel's in play? Because the ground is clogged up, right? And then you're also having to face, it's like you have this dual-pronged problem, right?
Brandon basically has to try to end the game as quickly as possible because Marvel plus Tracker just generates too much value. On the other hand, Steve can start attacking back, and if he gets up to 3 energy instead of 6, for example, he gets to make a Thopter token with Whirl of Virtuoso, which blocks and then makes an energy when it dies, and it's just this engine that just keeps on going and going. So Brandon wants to up the pressure here. He does get to attack for 5 in the air this turn, thanks to Smuggler's Copter and Selfless Spirit, but this is the last turn where I think he gets a very convenient hit off.
All right, so it does look like the Thraven Inspector jumping into the helicopter. But it might be that only the Smuggler's Copter is attacking.
Yeah, it looks like Selfless Spirit is staying home.
Selfless Spirit pretty poorly matched up against Virtuoso, but Steve only had 2 energy so far. Wow, and discarded a Gideon?
Well, he discarded a Gideon that he could cast. Presumably either has another Gideon or he has a play that he rates as better than Gideon, which is, there aren't very many plays like that.
All right, now I'm really curious to see what Brandon does this turn.
He could have a Declaration of Stone.
He just passed? Yeah.
Could have various counter magic. Honestly, the most fun games with Marvel are the ones where you don't hit on the Marvel, but you kind of grind it out, get more spins, keep marveling, and or hopefully eventually win.
No, it's cool. Like I said, this deck can play like a mid-range deck. You don't always, you actually miss with Marvel quite a bit, but you do, like a miss with Marvel is still not technically a miss, right? But you just miss on the Eldrazi.
And one of the ways the deck is constructed is, Steve only has 4 Eldrazi, 2 Ulamog, 2 Emrakul, whereas the Turbo Marvel decks we saw at the Pro Tour had 4 of each. So, twice as many Eldrazi hits, but a much weaker game. Like, they could never win a game where Marvel isn't in play.
Right.
Whereas this deck's very capable of winning games where Marvel never shows up.
We've also seen decks today that are playing like 7-ish Eldrazi, right? With like multiple copies of Ulamog. You're not casting Ulamog very quickly. This deck ramps you, but not that much.
Steve has a lot of options here, and his options play pretty well at instant speed, which is nice.
All right, so it looks like Tireless Tracker and Virtuoso getting into the red zone. All right, it's time to find out what Brandon passes turn, especially after discarding that Gideon. So he's kicking things off by cracking a clue.
That gives him more options, but it really limits what he can actually play. Like, he can no longer play Spell Queller. He can't play Stasis Scenario. There just aren't that many instances you can play once you've cracked that clue.
All right, so Tears of Valakut. I'm gonna take down that Selfless Spirit. The clue does get cracked. Let's see what Brandon finds.
That wasn't a great turn for Brandon.
No,
He spent 4 mana on a clue activation and didn't play anything else. So Steve is getting to the point where he's going to win even if he doesn't activate Marvel again.
Is Steve incentivized to play around counter magic now? Just kind of given that whole sequence of events, right? Discard Gideon, not do a whole lot on my turn. It seems like Brandon has counter magic.
It really is screaming out that Brandon has something like, Spell Shrivel or Spell Queller. But Steve didn't really give Brandon a great opportunity to do that. He cracked a clue and he cast an uncounterable spell. The Spell Queller actually does get to exile Tears of Valakut for reasons unbeknownst to me.
All right, so declaration in stone. It does take down the tireless tracker. It does provide Steve with a clue, though.
I think he'll be able to utilize that quite well with that marble in play.
So looks like Steve not even that interested in getting to 6. He's going to use 2 energy right there to crack a clue, though he does buy back. It has a little bit of a rebate, right? He does get to get 1 more energy when it actually hits the graveyard.
The clue, it had energy inside of it. Wow, Steve is just in really good shape here. He's just not facing down any pressure. He has multiple instants that interact. He's got a marvel just kind of looming there in the background that it will eventually be very, very relevant.
All right, so tireless tracker, and this might give Brandon a nod to finally use a counter magic he might be holding.
Pretty hard to resist doing so, even though Steve doesn't even have the land.
Yep, and there it is. It's Scatter to the Winds.
Steve was hoping it was a spell queller because he has that Harness Lightning ready to go,
Yep.
but honestly, getting your tireless tracker countered when you don't have any lands to play is just not the end of the world. So if Steve makes an attack into the Smuggler's Copter, he's really telegraphing Harness Lightning, but that might not be a problem.
If you're Brandon, though, do you go do you take the bait? Take the bait?
Well, if I'm literally Brandon, I think I do because he just activated it.
Well, that's not my question.
I think that Steve is a cautious enough player that I would put him on the Harness Lightning. The problem is you don't really have much going on if you don't activate Smuggler's Copter, or you're just not going to activate it next turn. So Brandon's kind of a no-win situation there.
Yeah, and Steve now down to 0 energy in these, he's been a little bit constrained on mana through some parts of this game, but those Servants of the Conduit are really doing a lot of work.
They're using up energy at a very fast rate. Steve's using up like 6 or 7 energy over the course of the game, feeding the Servants. But again, Steve's doing fine without this Marvel really being active. So I think he's okay with how this is transpiring.
So 2, and we're going to see the Vessel Nascency get cracked. This does give Steve 1 more energy. Let's see what's inside this vessel. It's really crowded in the
vessel.
I
was going to say, it's a pretty big vessel if it's holding Emrakul and Ruler Virtuoso. Is it a good sign or a bad sign that we both immediately run towards the, somewhat dubious joke?
It's very dubious, and I honestly, I don't know. My guess is it's bad.
Well, or great. Yeah, greatness at any cost.
People like greatness had 4 converted mana costs or less.
Yeah.
Let me tell you that.
Look, I belong to the very small club of people who have flipped Emrakul to Dark Confidant.
Yeah,
so.
But didn't you lose that game?
Oh, I did.
Oh, I guess you like to live dangerously. All right, so Steve choosing the Whirler Virtuoso from that vessel.
Which will get him closer and closer to using that Aetherworks Marvel.
And Virtuoso number 2 hits the board.
I guess assuming it resolves, which is not a given.
Yep, it gets scattered.
Well, Scattered Wind looking very good here.
And it's awakened.
Yeah, that 3/3 actually gives Brandon a little bit of pressure. He's been missing that, though. I still have a hard time imagining the 3/3 really getting much mileage against just multiple 2/2s and 2/3 blockers. Steve also has Ishkana in his hand, so at some point he's going to drop the Spider, and the board is going to get very crowded.
Servant being utilized once more. Another Vessel of Nascency makes an appearance for Steve. And Ishkana is the last card in hand.
Pretty good last card to have, honestly.
Especially once you have Delirium going.
And does Steve actually might be missing Delirium without the Vessel?
I think it's hard to tell because there's 1 card missing from the top.
It looks like just creatures and enchantments.
Yeah.
But Steve has another Vessel in play, so if he's able to crack Vessel and bin, a land in an instant, all of a sudden he will have Delirium.
So he drew a land, but he does have that Vessel. right, time to hit Delirium.
I've never seen Aetherworks Marvel generate so much energy that it then was not put it back into the Marvel.
Yeah, that Marvel is almost just set to the side, forgotten. It's not marvelous anymore. It's just. So that's instant. But yeah, there was a Tears over there.
Yeah, so there. Oh, so actually
And
there's already 3. So Land gets Steve to Delirium. He's got. It's actually convenient that that Vessel giving him an energy means that the Servant of the Conduit's back on. So Steve can play an Ishkanah. If it gets countered, next turn he can just play another one. And he's at 14. He's not dying out of nowhere here.
Yep, and here's a land, and now Steve's opportunity to try to resolve this Ishkanah. See if he goes for it.
Given the second Ishkanah in hand and nothing else to play, I'd be hard-pressed to imagine he doesn't.
And indeed, here he goes. Ishkanah hits the board, presumably.
The Graph Widow.
All right, and it does resolve. So here come 3 spiders as well. This looks like Archangel Avacyn making an appearance for Brandon.
I wanted to name a really esoteric flip card there, but I couldn't
For
think of one in
5,
time.
could you not think of one?
Not at instant speed.
Yeah.
A Tormented Pariah or something.
Oh my God. All right, so Gideon for Brandon.
Well, Brandon has amped up his board significantly. The end of turn Avacyn untap play Gideon gives him the kinds of cards he needs, but Avacyn can't even beat spiders. Like, what kind of Archangel is she?
One that's afraid of spiders, it looks like.
So if Brandon can find a way to flip Avacyn, she'll purify all the spiderlings, and then she can start attacking. But he's a little bit far away from that now.
Well, Steve has a Harness Lightning now.
That was a good draw. Steve still actually short on energy here. He really wants to draw like a Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot or something, because he wants to Harness Lightning away the Avacyn. And this is actually the first turn of the game where Steve kind of has run out of business.
How many does he play? So he plays less than the typical Marvel deck does, just because we've seen that he's less all in. So he has 3 in his deck.
Yeah, 3 of the Puzzle Knots. Steve might set up an attack hoping Avacyn blocks one of the creatures and then can get taken out by Harness Lightning.
Grand Prix players, time is up in round 9. As a player, please finish your turn, and both players take a total of 5 additional turns.
Steve's deciding what he wants to do this turn.
Please raise your hand and call for a judge.
And this is kind of a guessing game. If Brandon doesn't block with Avacyn, then this just did not work out all that profitably. Though, on the other hand, the spiders dying also gives Steven energy, so no matter what, actually, he's going to get energy unless Brandon just lets Gideon get hit for 2. So Brandon has to be suspicious that Steve's just trying to generate energy, but he may not have great answers to that.
I was going to say, how much are your alarm bells going off here as opposed to just saying, all right, you have to attack Gideon, sure.
I would assume that Steve is looking to generate energy and would rather you block. Thraben Inspector actually makes a nice little blocker because it bounces off the spider, but any other block Brandon makes, I would really be tempted to just block with Thraben Inspector and let Gideon take 1. On the other hand, if you're going to block and kill a spider, you might as well block and kill both.
Yeah, so he is going to choose that. So the 2 spiders do go down. And this does provide Steve with 2 more energy. And now this Harness Lightning is live to kill that Archangel Avacyn. And down she goes.
Removing Avacyn means that the biggest threat that Steve is facing is no longer relevant here. So even though Gideon's making a soldier or a knight ally each turn, it's still, I think Steve's in pretty good shape now because so many of his cards generate energy, and he's got to be pretty close to being able to just cast an Emrakul if he finds one.
Yeah, I mean, he's getting aggressive with the Ishkanah, it seems.
I like this too because either Gideon gets hit, Ishkanah eats something, or Steve gets a bit of energy, and it's possible that, yeah, like Steve's just going to be happy with, oh man, trading Ishkanov for a 3-3 and getting an energy when you have second Ishkanov to play, that sounds like the dream.
Yep. So Brandon was almost ready to block with the entire team, but instead is going to let that Gideon just take a bunch of damage. That does change what Steve wants to do this turn. He's instead going to go with Whirler Virtuoso.
Yeah, he might as well just keep attacking with Ishkanov until Brandon trades something for her. Players have to be running pretty close up against time, as some people have noted. You know, hearing the time being called for non-feature matches. Feature matches often get a little bit of extra time.
Yeah, is often a little bit of a different clock, not too much.
But these players don't have all the time in the world.
We will know though if they hit turns.
Yeah.
We will know over there. So. But I mean, we've seen a lot of these decks, and it's pretty grindy. Like, a lot of matches are going to time. You see things like green-black Delirium versus green-black Delirium, and those are just, a lot of them end up in draws, you know?
And I think the fact that the Marvel deck now plays much more mid-range, and Whirler Virtuosos and Ishkanaz means that, yeah, it tends to play longer games than the previous Marvel deck, which would either win the game very quickly or often lose it quite as quickly.
Go out in a flash of light.
Yes. Spin the wheel and miss.
Just Steve with that Ishkanaz in hand, and it looks like he's drawn a natural state.
Not an optimal draw here. I mean, it makes further draws from Brandon less good, but for right now, I think Steve would rather have almost anything else besides the land.
It's possible also that the players are playing a little bit more aggressively, because even if they are in a different clock, they do know that they have to finish this. So looks like Steve is getting pretty aggressive with all his creatures here.
He's not getting aggressive with his pace of play, though.
That's true. So Whirler Virtuoso, Servant of the Conduit, and Ishkanaz all getting in there.
So Brandon has favorable blocks, but Aetherworks Marvel does mean that Steve's fine if his creatures die. He's fine if Brandon's creatures die. He's fine if Gideon dies. There's just not a lot of ways for this to go that poorly for Steve.
So Brandon here deciding how he wants to line up some blocks. This 3/3 island is able to eat some of the stuff. Looks like Ishkanaz and Whirler Virtuoso will die in this exchange.
Oh, here we go. We're at 6 energy again.
Now we have enough energy to spin the wheel. So this could be very big. Also, I don't think Steve has... I think Steve might have like one Emrakul in the yard, so he might have a pretty good shot of finding it here. Ishkanaz hitting the board. Let's see if she resolves. Yes, she does.
And Brandon hasn't really played a relevant spell in the last 2 or 3 turns, which is, in a top decking situation, really unfortunate for your chances of winning.
He even gets to hold up that natural state.
Okay, Stasis Snare shows up.
And then you just get value.
Are going up. Legacy Quickfire players turn to round robin.
We're going to see a draw from Brandon.
And Steve decided not to use Marvel, maybe because he feels like he's ahead enough on board that he'd rather just wait and see what Brandon plays next and then use Marvel to kind of deal with that.
You think, is it more of a difference between like playing it at the end of the turn versus main phase, or what?
The main phasing it, as we've seen earlier, is to hit Emrakul. There's only one Emrakul left in Steve's deck. You're right, he does have one in his graveyard. So the one Emrakul versus having an instant speed Ulamog, which is much more powerful once Brandon maybe gives you another target.
All right, and so there's Stasis Snare.
That's just so good for Steve.
I'm telling you, talk about that value.
Now when Steve casts that natural state on the Stasis Snare, he gets Ishkanaz back and gets 3 more spiders. Like, that could not have worked out better for Steve. Assuming it resolves. If Brandon has a counter spell, that things change. But
It is the very last card, too. All right, so it looks like Steve's going to lead maybe by activating this Marvel. Pay 6 energy, and let's see what's in there. Well, there's definitely an Ishkana.
yeah, and a natural state. So he has a lot of ways to get to Ishkana here. Steve's just going to overrun Brandon with spiders. Actually, Steve has 8 spiders now. If he can generate an energy, he can use Servant of the Conduit for black mana, or use Ether Hub for black mana, and just drain Brandon out straight up.
The Ishkana activation, maybe. Oh, it's going to get spell shriveled. Bye-bye. No Ishkana for Steve. Well, he does get an Ishkana, but not the same way.
There's so many Ishkanas. I don't know if I've seen Ishkana cast this many times in a game.
You know, this is definitely close to breaking out. Look, we've run out of spider tokens.
That's a lot of spiders.
A Vessel of Nascency as the draw for Steve.
So Steve looking to see how Brandon can block. Brandon has 5 blockers. If Steve attacks with everything except for 1 Servant of the Conduit, then that leaves up enough mana to use Ishkana's ability. Maybe he does not attack with Ishkana. So if he attacks with all the spiders and Servant and Whirler Virtuoso, he's got 9 attackers. Brandon blocks 5 of them, 4 get through, and then Steve can't necessarily... Well, he can block 5 spiders, but he doesn't kill 5. He only kills 4 spiders, and that should leave enough for Steve to have lethal. I think if Steve attacks with everything except Ishkana and Servant of the Conduit, I think he's got lethal here.
I think that's what he's thinking about, too. Look, he's lining up the blocks and seeing what happens when I attack with this and all of these. All right, yeah, here they come.
Yep, this attack looks great. Wait, where'd it go? Steve also wondering if he could attack with Ishkana, because it would have to be double blocked in order to die, at which point Brandon blocks those 3, and that's not quite lethal.
Yeah, it looks like he just wants to lay it out and just double check and make sure. This is one of those games that feels like it's in the bag.
No, there's nothing worse than missing an on-the-board kill or making the wrong attack, so I don't blame Steve for checking and then triple checking.
Yeah.
But
here they're coming back in again. All the spiders, the Virtuoso, the Servant of the Conduit, not the Ishkana.
And there's no way for Brandon to survive without making some blocks. And I guess Brandon actually... So Brandon's path to survival here is blocking the Servant of the Conduit with Thraben Inspector and blocking Whirler Virtuoso with a Knight, and then just taking 7 damage falling to 1. And by doing that, Steve doesn't get access to black mana off energy because none of his creatures die. Of course, that's not a very appetizing block.
Mm-hmm.
And now Steve is going to be able to generate the energy he needs.
Yep, and here they all die. Here's the energy.
You know what the last game action we're going to see of day 1 of the Grand Prix?
It is the Ishkana activation. 4 and you lose life. And there is the handshake, and Steve Rubin improves to undefeated here at Grand Prix Denver. And that's going to do it here for round 9 for GB Denver.